everybody. It's Penny and Craig. We're here today to introduce our first podcast, Living Through Risk Assessment. So, Craig, do you want to first introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Craig Spielman. I've been in risk management for many years. I worked at JP Morgan, Citigroup, Royal Bank of Scotland, had senior roles there. At JP Morgan, I started the IT risk function and then created a methodology for RCSA and one of the first GRC tools. And we rolled it out and then commercialized it. I've probably done at least 10,000 RCSAs. Also worked with 26 different companies and helped them with their rollouts from start to finish. And now I'm doing consulting. Penny and I have been friends for many years and we work together. And I think she's a leader in this field as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Penny.
Thank you, Craig. And yes, we certainly have known each other probably 20 years. And I've been in risk management about 40 years. I've worked for JP Morgan's and Citi and risk and compliance functions. Like Greg, I was on the vendor side for a number of years. In fact, I think when I met at Algorithmics, I originally brought an operational risk database to market, ended up selling it to Fitch Ratings, and they incorporated into the Algorithmics brand. And then I did spend time as head of operational risk for the consumer businesses at JP Morgan, and then for the Americas at MUFG and GBS. I spent a stint at Ernst & Young. I most recently have been doing consulting work, and I also teach in the Enterprise Risk Management Master's Program at Columbia and through NYU's Business and Technology Program. So that's me. And I just
You're also an author.
I am. So thank you. I have a new book out. It's called Managing Operational Risk in a Changing World. It is available on Amazon. So
And
thank
it's
you.
a great book. I actually went through it. Penny interviewed me for the RCSA section. Overall, it's a great book and I highly recommend it.
Thank you, Craig. And I was thrilled to have had you as one of the interviewees in the book. So let's get into it, Craig. Okay. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that sits at the heart of operational risk management, the risk and control self-assessment, or some people fondly call it the RCSA or RCSA. This is the first in a series that we're planning on risk management. Our hope is that it'll allow you to advance your thinking on the topic. This is a gift we want to give to the industry in terms of sharing our thinking and our experience. The series is designed for risk management professionals and actually others who want to achieve their business goal. After listening to the series, you will know more about risk management than most. So the title of the discussion today is Living Through Risk Assessment. And living is the important word there. We want to make it real, right? And impactful. I think the exact right question to ask right now is RCSA relevant? So RCSA has been around for a long time. In many organizations, it's one of the foundational components of operational risk framework. I like to tell my students it brings all the other components together because most of the other components of risk management framework are inputs into a RCSA. Ultimately, it's designed to assess risks against defined goals. Hopefully, that's against a business's strategy, and the controls are designed to manage those risks within risk appetite. If it's performed with care and intention, it will assist with achieving your strategic goals and hopefully be relevant. I know when I mention RCSA, sometimes I get eggs thrown at me. Some people see it as an essential tool for understanding and managing risk and ultimately strategy. Others see it as overly manual, overly subjective, too burdensome, sometimes disconnected from the real risks facing the business and the strategy. And I've often heard the complaint, we go through all this work and you tell us what we already know. So today, Craig and I are going to unpack the value and challenges associated with risk. And I have to tell you, there's no better person than Craig on this topic in terms of his depth of knowledge, his experience. Craig, I'm so pleased to engage in this conversation with you. And I'm wondering if you could just start by setting the stage of why you think this podcast is so important and why this topic is so critical.
RCSAs take a long time to be saturated into the organization. Penny and I both have gone through this, as I mentioned in the opening. One of the reasons why we wanted to do this podcast is to try to get this to a much higher state and make it useful to the business. At the end of the day, this has to be about helping the business achieve their goals. And too many RCSAs aren't doing that. I've done RCSAs with salespeople, with traders, with all kinds of different organizations, and those people you would think would be resistant. We actually went through it. They understood how important it was, and they did learn a lot about their environments and their business that they didn't know before. So I think us sharing insights and also some ideas about how we can improve this, how we can get more people to embrace it, I think is how I see our podcast going.
And my second line used to execute RCSA on behalf of the business and basically hand it to them and then ask them to respond. And we've seen a huge shift in terms of first line ownership of RCSA. And at one point, when the execution of it went to the first line, I was continuing to facilitate RCSA workshops from my second line role, but even the facilitation moved to the first line, and which is where it belongs. The business needs to own it. To your point, to understand how it aligns with strategy, for instance. I think where we're going with this is that RCSA isn't broken. What might be broken is how it's applied, and potentially there's room for improvement in how it's executed. The criticism that I get, and I've heard it throughout my entire career, is that it's basically a check the box exercise. We spend a half a year or more executing, assessing inherent risk, testing controls, developing residual risk, and then you tell us that we're high for money laundering. We knew that, right? But I think if you really think about emerging risks and using it to apply emerging risks, bringing in things like scenario analysis, it can have great value. And then also making sure it's aligned with your strategy and you're testing it against the strategy. And you have the right voices in your workshops, for instance, when you're doing inherent risk. I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit about some of the present implementation challenges and maybe
Yeah.
respond to some of the criticism that I.
That you outlined, we've all shared. A
Yeah.
lot of it has to do with the people actually who are responsible for pushing the RCSA out as well.
Yes.
And their understanding of the business, their understanding of how to reach an audience. I have a list of 10 things, which we'll save for another podcast here that we'll go through. But when I'd walk in a room, the first thing I would say to people, and I could see their faces, they were there because they had to be there and they're looking at their phones and watches and everything. And I would say, I'm here to help you make money. And all of a sudden, everybody's head would pop up. And I truly meant that. It wasn't just a sales hook, although a little bit of a hook. But when I've changed people's attitudes quite a bit, because that's exactly what it's there to do. It's actually there to help us make money in a way that makes sense or achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve within your appetite, right? And that's one of the key things. But the fact that it check the box has to do with not linked to strategy and goals generally. And that's probably the biggest problem that I've seen. People just go off and start doing them based on a process or based on a business unit. I think that is the key thing because if you do it based on where the organization's going, that does tell management something. So RCSA is critical if it does that for you. If it's just a matter of documentation exercise, or I have to do this to satisfy regulators or somebody else, then you get a lot of minutia. Another problem that I see, Penny, is people don't understand real risk at the end of the day. They end up documenting everything under the sun, or they sometimes miss some real material risk because they don't know where the organization's going. I always start out with there's 5 things you could do to a business. You could increase market share, you could increase the profitability of the business, you can improve risk management, which could mean a JV, it could mean doing RCSAs, it could mean a lot of things, okay? You could increase your capacity, which could mean products, people, stuff with AI today is helping increase capacity. And the last thing you could do is sell the business. So I would start out asking people, which one of those 5 is your area focused on? And usually I get a smattering of profitability, and sometimes that's not the right answer. Once you have that, then you could start figuring out what the real risks are to the strategies. Okay, so what's your strategy? Now let's talk about that. What risk would you incur trying to implement that strategy? And those are the kind of discussions that you need to have to start this thing off.
Yeah, so, and that's all good points. And I think having senior management engagement is important. But one of the firms I worked in, I was told to fix our CSA on my first day on the job. That particular firm had a big risk event. So I was curious, did the RCSA capture the risk event, right? So I pulled the RCSA for it was a trading event for that particular trading desk. And it was all there, but nobody did anything about it. So some
Right.
really smart junior person had identified all the key risks and the control issues, and it sat in the document. So I started thinking about how important senior management engagement is and how they can't be divorced from the project and or from the process. And so I introduced top-down workshops. Ideally, I wanted the CEO and his or her management team to kick off each RCSA for their business. And believe me, that wasn't easy to get them at the table.
No,
To
it
your
is.
point, they sat on their computers, many of them. One of them I remember got up and got ready to leave. And I'm like, could you please sit down? I'm here because I have your back. I'm here to help you manage your business. And it did evolve into a process where we had these top-down workshops. It kicked off every RCSA. I didn't want to use a taxonomy. I didn't want to speak taxonomy speak or speak with them. I just wanted to have a conversation. And I know when I started passing it off to like the first line to do some of these workshops, they're like, can you give me a script? And I felt, no, you need to just have a conversation about risk with your senior management. And one of the organizations where I worked in a different one where I was doing these top down workshops, I would then have workshops with the people that actually were on the ground executing the process. And the disconnect between what senior management said was really important and what the people doing the work actually said was important was remarkable in that particular organization. And I needed to work to bring them together, right? So that
Yeah.
people that were doing the process mapping work and the testing and looking at the processes end to end understood the management perspective.
I'll give you an example on ERM strategy at First Data, and Frank Bizignano was the CEO at the time. And when we came up with our plan to start rolling RCSA plus other things out, Frank made it mandatory for every senior manager to come to our training session. So we had everybody based with Frank's leadership, which was great. For senior people, we did more of the goals and strategy because that's what they're responsible for at the end of the day. For the people who are in operations and down, middle manager down, they look at it as, oh, this is going to add on to my work. And we showed them that it wouldn't. We showed them there's going to be a little bit of a ramp up and you're probably going to have to work extra hours. But then as this thing gets smoother, it's going to be help save you from firefighting. It should be able to point out where some weaknesses are that if you fix ahead of time, you won't be firefighting. You won't be here till midnight. So we had two different approaches. We had one deck, but we had two different approaches. So that really helped because it's know your audience at the end of the day. And the senior people, training them about risk management, I think is the key thing in any industry.
So for
Yeah,
the RCSA class, I always ask them, like, how would you apply risk assessment to your own lives? And that helps engage them. I'm also learning a lot in terms of prompts and questions and how to present material that actually would be very valuable in conducting an RCSA workshop. Yeah, that was interesting connection there, which I hadn't thought about.
I always looked at it as they're giving me their time. I've got to make the most of it, something that they can relate to.
I'm a framework geek at heart, but I've always said if any framework, an RCSA framework included, is only as useful as its ability to be implemented. So would love to talk about what you're seeing evolving in the RCSA field recently and how you've seen like kind of the implementation of RCSA changing.
Sure. And I don't think it's evolved enough. All right. And we go back, we rolled out our CSA at JP Morgan in 1996. When here we are in 2026, and I go to places and it's the same questions, it's the same challenges,
Templates, the same
same
templates.
templates. And you might be, and actually, this is in Penny's book as well. I started questioning what we were doing with material risk, inherent risk versus residual risk. And I came to the conclusion that there was no such thing as residual risk. As I would ask my clients, why would you say something can't happen or it's unlikely to happen? And no one can give me a good answer. So therefore, when I look at the chain of information going up to the board at some level, you're basically misleading the board because you're making a decision based on no information. It's just, I heard the business wouldn't like it if it was a high risk. So you could take a critical risk and you could actually make it medium if we go to the formulas that were built many years ago and haven't changed. and you could make them miss a real material risk. One bank out here actually had me rewrite their policy, and we had business involvement. So we looked at inherent risk in a way of really what could this do to the institution and come up with an exposure amount. We also didn't use boxes. Okay. We just actually got as close as we could to actually a true outcome if something were to go wrong for this particular process. And that actually really got the business people engaged because we were talking dollars and cents now. Now, we all recognize it's an approximation, but still, it gave us an idea of what was valuable and what was less valuable. And then we actually said, okay, let's look at that. Now that we know what our exposure is for this particular process, let's look at how the controls work. And we tested the controls, we went through all the control ratings, and we never brought them together. We just said, this is the exposure. Let's say it's $4 billion, and this is how the controls are, and this is what's lacking. So then the business can make a decision like, can I live with that risk or not? And the answer in some cases was no. And they like that approach versus giving them boxes with red. Another problem with the boxes is people would tell me my high risk is $5 million. And I would say, yeah, during the crisis, companies lost 70 billion. So how does that fit into that box? It doesn't. It's misleading. So the whole thing is what I'm looking for at this point, and again, some of the institutions I've worked with actually have done this, is really look at exposure levels based on facts, based on income statements, based on all kinds of things. And then look at the controls, assess the controls, and see if they're good enough to manage that type of exposure. The business people like that a lot better.
And
They're more involved and now it means something to them. And I'll show them when this institution, they've lost this amount of money for this particular process, right? And there's that information's out there. So I make it real for them and they look at it and they scale it and figure out, okay, if we're doing this much business, this is what we could lose. So let's take a look at that. But understanding exposure is harder, right? It's harder to do. But once you do it, everything becomes easy. And then business can make actual business decisions that make sense. And that's how I've been able to engage the business.
so I've gone down a similar path with my clients and encouraging them to just think about impact, right? What's
Yeah.
the impact of the risk, which is essentially the same thing, and getting away from the whole frequency and severity
Okay.
calculations, thinking
Yep.
about what the ultimate impact would be, and then thinking about controls in terms of what's your risk appetite to invest in those controls, right? It's not a risk reward, but a kind of risk control kind of investment decision. So
Yeah,
that's
and the boxes were
interesting.
comfort food. Yeah, back in the day, we didn't know any better.
Yeah.
It sounded good, but,
I mean, you've
became
sat through those workshops, like what's the ultimate impact and will your controls manage it within appetite? If not, you need to fix your controls. But yeah, I did recently have a discussion with somebody in a manufacturing company who's starting an ERM program, wanted to know about RSting because I tend to live in my financial service bubble. So I'm just wondering what your ideas are in terms of RCSA, the application of RCSA outside of financial services.
Oh, yeah, and that's great. I've used it for the US Army, and when I was with JP Morgan, and we actually came up with an RCSA based on them picking up spent munitions, and we came up with risk and controls and the whole works because that could be quite dangerous.
Yeah.
And so that was the US Army. You look at the drug companies, they do extensive RCSAs. You look at construction, right? If you look at OSHA, all the OSHA stuff that goes on, they need to constantly be doing this. But I've used it with high school kids, go around trying to pass on information, trying to make it better. I wish I had an RCSA when I was growing up, let's put it that way, and putting up simple templates. Okay, what are the risks of you getting into college? So you have financial risk, you have other risks that could make a difference. And we laid out what the controls should be, for example. And the kids could really like that a lot. They thought that was pretty interesting because they weren't thinking of it that way. I think the college, do you have the right grades, for example? Do you have a good resume? And all these controls you could put into place. And then it's up to you to decide if you really have the guts to achieve those things.
Yeah.
by doing the actions that are required to get you somewhere. And that's what I think the thing that people are missing.
Yeah, and I've done a huge amount of research on Boeing and all the quality control issues. I've
Yeah.
written a lot about it in blogs. So if anybody is listening from Boeing, would love to talk to you about doing an
Yeah.
RCA. I'm just saying, I
Reach
think it could
out.
add great value to your quality program.
Yeah.
So, Craig, I think we are at time. This has been a great discussion. I think the takeaway is not that RCSA is outdated, but that outdated RCSA practices need to change and evolve, and the process needs to be designed for the real world and for the change that we're all experiencing as well. So I want to thank you for this and thank everybody for listening. We hope the discussion helped reframe RCSA not as an administrative burden, but as a powerful tool for understanding and managing operational risk in a changing world. I want to remind everybody that I do have a book called Managing Operational Risk in a Changing World. It has an interview with Craig in it, a chapter on RCSA, along with all the other frameworks, elements, and an operational risk framework.
Yeah, I would say reach out to us on LinkedIn too. Penny and I love to speak to people and be in contact with people. I'm Craig Spielman and Penny Kagan.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. All right, bye bye.